Welcome to the OTT Talks. We've created this space to share insights from think tankers around the world on how they've dealt with the challenges brought on by the COVID-19 crisis and how they can prepare for future crises. Today, we're talking to Wailea Zülch, foraus engagement manager, on how to engage with staff and particularly with volunteers and interns. So, Wailea, thank you for joining us today, and it's great to see you. You said you are in Zurich, right?
Yes, thanks first of all for inviting me. And yes, I'm in rainy Zurich at the moment. Doesn't even feel like summer here. It's very grey today.
And can you tell me a little bit about foraus and how foraus works with its volunteers and interns before we go into the specific questions?
Yes, sure, because foraus in general advocates constructive foreign policy and an informative dialogue, but we're based on a very unique model, a grassroots model with over 120 volunteers in an official role. Sometimes there are even more writing blogs and publications. So foraus in general publishes scientific-based policy recommendations in different forms, from discussion papers to policy briefs to blog posts or also policy recipes. And we or the volunteers organize high-level debates with the aim to create innovative solutions for foreign policy. And just maybe some figures to give a bit an overview. In 2019, our volunteers published 54 blogs and organized 89 events, wrote 9 publications, which helped us to get 326 media mentions. And we celebrated our 10 years last fall, and by over the 10 years, we have developed to having actually a dozen employees. We have 2 offices, one in Zurich and one in Geneva. And 1/3 of our employees are, however, interns. So if I understood it right, we're going to discuss today is really a bit the volunteer structure, but also how we engage the relatively big part of our team, which are interns.
So you said a dozen employees, 1/3 of those are interns, but how many volunteers that foraus have?
I mean, we have like a 2-pillar structure the main structure is divided into programs and regional groups. Our programs do the content work. They write the discussion papers or policy briefs. And the regional groups, they mostly organize events on foreign policy topics. And then we also have still a blog team and a bit like smaller structured society. We always say it's around 120 people which are with an official role. But you can have more active people around the program or regional group leads. So it depends a bit. I mean, you don't have to be an official volunteer in order to write a blog, for example, but in order to write a publication, you will have to be a foraus member.
Okay, but you at least you would count 120 people as as those volunteers that you are actively engaging with on your job.
Yes, exactly.
With a team of 12 that are sort of working for foraus, whether full-time staff or as interns. So it's the relationship between the core team and the volunteers is it's quite striking. You clearly depend on a network of volunteers around Switzerland, right? These are people based in Switzerland in different cities and towns and villages, I guess.
Yeah. Exactly. We're all over Switzerland, and our regional groups are placed in all the university cities. And then for the program, it depends, but I mean, we're mostly in university cities, the German and especially also the French-speaking part.
So can you tell me a little bit more about how you engage with volunteers specifically?
Of course. So as I already mentioned, we have those working groups or programs, and actually this is very broad. We have them ranging from diplomacy and international actors to international law, science and technology or migration. And they are very free to write on whatever topic they find interesting. And because it's so broad, it's quite easy to fit it in one of the existing programs, actually. And then our regional groups, they also have full liberty to work on any foreign policy topic they want to, as long as it has a relation with foreign policy. And I think this is something very important, this bottom-up feature of foraus, which I perceive as a great motivating force for our volunteers. And then in order to strengthen the sense of community between those around 120 volunteers, we use technological tools like Policy Kitchen, which is a foraus developed ideation platform, and we do very, very many events or networking events, which range from like a monthly action call where we try to really have like just a regular exchange, what are you working on, and a bit like this, to a biannual retreat where we try to really get them all together for a weekend, for workshops, and also again the exchange. And maybe last but not least, this has been a work we've done especially last summer. We've really tried to also identify, or like, yeah, I mean, they have existed, most of them already before, but to more clearly state what the benefits are if you put that amount of hours into a voluntary work, what do you get in return? And I mean, there are various benefits. For sure, for volunteers, it's really important to get access to our network, but it's also things like a reference letter, or I mean, for younger students, also just to have a business card or an official mail address is a big value.
So you give them you have like a list of benefits. If you're a volunteer, it's almost like a membership. You make them feel they're part of an institution, so they become a member of the institution as well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, a lot of my work is really to create a community between those individuals who want to work, like put voluntary work into foraus. It's really a lot of just like putting the right heads together, that we don't have silos or like people working in silos in Geneva and Zurich, and also have the programs cooperate together.
And you have these benefits in kind of listed out as these are the things you get. Can you share them with us?
Yes, of course. So I mean, there are like 6 clear benefits which we listed out for just really being a foraus member. And I mean, it's always the more active you are, the more you can benefit of them. If you want, I can really just read them out. Yeah. So, like, I mean, the first one is to help make decisions, and then we have a newsletter which is members only, where they get updates from the community, but also job offers which we get sent, and we always do a little surprise. Can be like win a ticket for a certain event, or get one of our new goodies. And then, I mean, it's in general, it's also a lot that people come because they know they find like-minded people just to discuss politics. And then an access to our network, which we have built up in the 10 past years. And any member has the possibility to write a publication. And if, like, the process of writing a publication with foraus, you have a lot of coaching throughout the way. And then once it's published, you have really an entire media strategy. So this is, I think, a very great benefit they get. And then a community know-how. So, I mean, if you have an idea, but it's not developed yet, you can do a little ping pong and get some feedback on it. And then, like for those really 120 volunteers in an official role, they get exclusive events as the retreat, which I mentioned, or a Christmas dinner. And they also appear on our website with a picture and a small bio. They have an email address, a foraus email address, and a business card. They get a reference letter after their voluntary commitment, and they get coachings, sometimes in groups, sometimes one-on-one sessions, if it's their first media request, for example. Yeah.
To join this network and to get these benefits, is there an application process? So you have to you review who comes in as a volunteer, who participates of these spaces, of these events.
Yes, there's an application process for the 120 volunteers in an official function.
Right.
And there's really also an interview process, and then an entire evaluation. So there we really look quite clearly that it's a match. But then within the community of a program or the community of a regional group, anyone can participate. So like if I'm a student in my bachelor's and I just want to help to organize an event, I'm able to contact the regional group in Zurich, for example, and ask, okay, I saw you organize an event in 2 months. What can I do? Can I help you to organize the apéro? So it's a bit of a mixed model in that sense.
Great. And so let's talk briefly about the interns. My experience working with foraus has been you have an incredibly motivated group of interns and very highly qualified. I think the first time I had a project with foraus running the winter school, I really did not realize that the people running it were interns at foraus. I thought they were full-time staff. But so how do you keep them motivated and engaged with the organization and what they do? Do they come from this group of volunteers often, or do they arrive to foraus through some other means?
I mean, of course, it's a benefit if we recruit the interns and they've already had some volunteer experience with foraus. It's not the key point we look at, but I mean, I think a clear benefit of having actually such a high amount of interns in such a small team is that we hand over quite a lot of responsibility. And we're a small team. We're all like quite young, so we really try to also not have too hierarchical structures. So they get responsibility, but they get closely followed and coached throughout the way. And I mean, for volunteers, it's very interesting because they, of course, get even more access to our network as we take them to events, as they can join the Wish, which you already mentioned. And and then we have small things like every Monday morning, we do a Monday morning meeting, and we really try to pay attention that also the interns come in with their input, what's going on this week. So we really also just try to create the space that they can develop within foraus.
Okay, and so let's move on to the effect that a crisis like COVID-19 has had on your network of volunteers. What have you observed in relation to their ability to engage with the activities of foraus? I know that Switzerland has not been hit as hard as other places, but it must have had an effect of some sorts.
Yes, it had. Of course, it had an effect. And I mean, first of all, I think that with the crisis unfolding, voluntary commitment, especially in the first weeks when everyone had to adapt to the new situation, just became less of a priority. And I mean, people reacted differently. People are different. And at the same time, we also saw a difference between our two pillars, the regional groups and the programs. So for the regional groups, I think the impact has been harder. They have been hit harder because they mostly do events, and this hasn't been possible anymore. Yeah. And at the same time, also they are younger. They are mostly students in the bachelor or maybe masters. And what I have felt is that they have been very stressed about the uncertainty because of all the classes being switched to the online space, but not sure how the exam is going to look like. Mm-hmm. So especially now in like May and June, it was very hard also to reach them because they were so focused on their studies and trying to cope with the new university situation. And for our programs, actually, it almost had a good positive impact because they had more time. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot easier to work on content as everyone was at home. And we had actually more blogs being written in the past weeks than usually, and really new publication projects, which were planned and some also already executed. So I think for them, it was really easier to cope with. And also probably because they are older, many of them are in the end of their masters or really PhD students, young professionals. So I think this also had an impact on them.
I guess they were more used to working online and remotely because that's what they do, right? They are they're engaging with foraus in a online way, in a remote way, writing these articles, sort of putting together these reports. This was not something they had to relearn. Whereas you said the regional volunteers had to rethink about how they would engage with their local community, having done so face to face.
Yeah, you're very right. It's like our regional groups, they are young students in the same city, so they really like meet to organize the events, and our programs, the participants are really spread across the country. So they anyway communicate a lot on the phone, or like have a Google Doc where they all work together already before the crisis. So yes, the impact has been, or they have been more used to it. You're very right.
And what about your interns?
And I mean, for our interns, it of course also had an impact, which is interesting. I mean, we have many interns, like many of the interns coming to us, they are between like their bachelor's and their master's. Mm-hmm. So they have lived alone, and now they return to their parents. I think this has been actually quite challenging for some. And, but I mean, again, also it's like, it depends on the person. But what we see also is that, I mean, other skills or some skills became very, very important throughout the time, and not everyone brought them with them when they joined foraus. I mean, it was in home office, it's very important that you really can work independently, that you think proactively, that you really reach out to the person if you need something. And I mean, we've really tried to also be more available to like give them the feeling that they can reach out, but we saw that there were differences in how it was managed. And also, of course, like in this cohort of interns, they knew or they had a lot less the possibility to get to know each other, as well as the procedures of foraus. I mean, we were very lucky because they joined foraus in January, and in Switzerland the lockdown started mid-March. Would have, if they would have started a bit later, I think it would have been a lot harder to cope with the situation. But it also had a very positive effect that we saw, for example, a new team dynamic between our interns in Zurich and Geneva, which are usually less cooperating because of the physical distance. Yeah. And now online, it was a lot easier to just like chat on different topics. Right. So I think this is something really great, actually.
That's interesting.
And I mean, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to say what for them also was a loss is that, but the same as for the regional groups, is that they couldn't access the network as much because many meetings were cancelled.
Yeah. So I think for ours, you have a structured way of taking in interns, right? So it's at certain times of the year that they come in for a certain number of months, right?
Yes, exactly. So they come in usually in January, and then now we have a switch in July with 6-month interns.
Okay, and so tell me, what have you done to address these challenges that the volunteers faced? Did you change anything in terms of how you engage with volunteers during this period?
Yeah, we've really put a lot of effort into creating this sense of community by organizing more calls than usually, and giving really the space for exchange that they can exchange about their feelings throughout the lockdown, but also to share best practices for those who wanted to do an online event, that they could learn from each other or from someone who already did it. Just to mention maybe some of the spaces we created, like there was a versus virus hackathon where everyone could join who was interested. We on Policy Kitchen, this ideation platform I mentioned earlier, we created a COVID-19 discussion group so everyone could join and give the input, and other open discussion groups on Policy Kitchen as on environment. And also personally, I did a lot more one-on-one calls as well, just really checking in with the people and trying to get them to do events. We saw this was actually for the regional group the motivation was not wow, no explosion on, oh, I really want to do an online event. It was more like, oh, I'm already having so many Zoom calls and then university online. So for example, we tried to do an online moderation webinar with 2 external experts, so that they learn that not all online events have to be boring and dry. Yeah.
And with the interns, the same. I'm guessing a lot more effort of bringing them together online, creating that sense of an office, even if they're not there, a sense of a community, even if they're not there.
Yeah, we actually right in the first week, I think it was, we started with a virtual coffee break every morning at 10 a.m. Everyone would bring a coffee and we just chatted for 10 minutes on how's your day, what's your plan. So this was also really nice because it was also an exchange, actually we're still doing it, between Zurich and Geneva. And in general, as you said, just really giving the space to really listen to them. And I mean, with my intern, we really had a daily check-in, but I also really try to motivate her that whenever there's a question, she can just call me, not that she has to stock her questions, and then, to be more available, maybe even.
And to acknowledge that people are dealing with this in different ways, I guess, and that every way is okay. Every way to dealing with this is just fine, and it has different implications for their work and for what the organization has to do for them. So, what do you take as a lesson so far from this experience?
So we are still lockdown was lifted, or is in the process of being lifted in Switzerland. So we're little by little slowly returning to the office, and we're still evaluating on how the office structure will look like in the following month. But I mean, something which we, talking about the interns just before, really want to do is to actually keep this 10 a.m. coffee routine, or this more personal exchange as well. And also just to listen more, also ask more about the well-being of the staff, and listen, because this has been done now because everyone was conscious, okay, lockdown, it's a new situation, but it's something which is always positive to give the space to just express. And of course, I mean, so we had lessons learned from online events and live streams, and we would love to integrate them in our work afterwards as well. I mean, many of us are very happy that physical events are possible since some days under certain rules, but it's also interesting to see that actually some formats function very well online, and online can be a very exclusive space. So to really also see that depending on the topic or what the goal is, there are now more the 2 options, whereas maybe before it was more okay, always physical.
And I was talking to a foreign policy think tank the other day, and they were saying that since having to use Zoom and other online conferencing tools, they realized that they were reaching a much more global audience, and that made sense because they were a foreign policy think tank. And they were also able to bring speakers from around the world to their conferences. Whereas before, they had to rely on who was around, right? Who was in Geneva or in Zurich, for instance. Have you had that experience as well, that being forced to go online has allowed you to reach a much broader audience, both as participants and as speakers?
Yeah, I mean, one crazy example, also very personal in that sense, is that Policy Kitchen, this ideation platform, we ran a big campaign on feminist foreign policy this spring. With actually, we're part of a network of think tanks which run based on the same model. It's called the Open Think Tank Network, and it was a project from 5 think tanks together. But usually, the model how Policy Kitchen functions is that we organize physical ideation workshops, and then it's possible for anyone around the world to join just writing the idea on the platform and elaborating on it. But now, of course, everything was in the online virtual space. So we had in those discussions, which usually or those ideation workshops, which would take place in Zurich, for example, I was moderating a group where there were 5 people. One was from India, one was from Peru, one was from Berlin. But like, it was really, really multicultural, and this we would not have reached or managed to do in a physical workshop. So I think this is, for me, it felt like, wow, it's really cool. Now it's super inclusive already from the very beginning, the ideation process. And I mean, for the events our volunteers they did less of those very high level events in the past month. They did more like small communities, community exchange, because I think for them it was actually really stressful, the uncertainty, and they never knew, okay, when I organize now a big event with high level stakeholders, usually it takes 2 or 3 months to organize it, or sometimes even more. And then they were a bit more reluctant in putting that effort in organizing such a big event, I would say.
But in the end, it works well, because you reach new audiences, you have a much more diverse group, a much more interesting and rich discussion in the end.
And actually really interesting, because I said, I mean, we now will have a switch of the interns. So the past weeks we have all been recruiting interns, and you saw more applicants than usual, because maybe more people have time now to look at the internships, but also maybe because people joined more those online webinars, so they maybe heard of us in a way they wouldn't have heard of us before. I think this, it's interesting.
Great. So thank you very much, Wailea, and we look forward to hearing more thoughts from our audience when we share this video, and to maintain this engagement with them, and also I hope this has helped them to maintain a productive, healthy engagement with their staff, with their interns, and with their volunteers if they have them. So please follow us on our YouTube channel for more OTT talks from experts in the field. Great, thank you very much again. I hope things continue to work well for foraus' great network of volunteers and interns. You guys, I think you guys do a very good job at that, and I'm surely learning from that experience.
Thank you very much for having me.